Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy podcast. This is episode 71. It's All in the Story with Cecilia McDowall. This is another installment of the Oxford series on the Choralosophy podcast, which is a collaboration between Oxford University Press and myself here at the Choralosophy podcast, where we get to bring you together fascinating conversations with some of the leaders in the choral profession and some of the greatest minds in the choral profession that all are affiliated with Oxford University Press. So it's a great and exciting collaboration that I'm really enjoying. The next up, of course, is Cecilia, who has long been one of my favorite choral composers. If I were to boil down my reason for this, it would come down to her masterful ability to transport both audience and performer through space and time with her writing. In this conversation, I was able to understand a bit more about how her approach works, and it all became more clear as I was talking to her that one of the reasons that she's able to do this is that she really immerses herself in the story of each piece that she is writing. And in fact, you will hear her voice light up. And if you're watching on the YouTube channel, you will see her face light up when she's talking about some of the various stories that she's engaged in right now to turn them into choral works. And it became so obvious to me that if she's as excited and engaged in each of these pieces as she is, that it's no wonder that that pours onto the page. So be a fly on the wall and stick around as we discuss her writing process, her thoughts on balancing composition, teaching, and motherhood throughout her life, as well as an exploration of the vulnerability one must face to sing and to compose. I hope you enjoy. One interesting thing about the Choralosophy podcast is that it is completely independently produced, meaning there is no organization, no institution, no foundation behind this show or behind this production. There's no company, nothing. It's all supported by listeners and listener involvement. The most direct way that you can do that is through Patreon. At patreon.com/Choralosophy, you can join a subscribers only environment where I put extra content, meaning a behind the scenes episode every month, supplemental materials. The people on the Patreon get to see who's coming on the show ahead of time, which means they can put bugs in my ear ahead of time about what I should ask the person about. All kinds of fun perks. There's even an awesome Choralosophy hat and t-shirt. There's all kinds of fun ways to do that over at Patreon. Now, it's an important thing because if you enjoy this show, the couple thousand or so people that tune in on a regular basis to this show, if 10% of you were to join the Patreon, it would change the game for my ability to make this production better and better over the course of the next year. So producers, there is a producer level that you can opt into over there as well. The Patreon producers are Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Chandler Smith, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Michael Herron, Ryan Main, and Steve and Kathy Kakachik. Okay, everybody, I am here with Cecilia McDowall. Cecilia is one of my favorite choral composers and also is the next guest on the Oxford series. And so I'm super excited to have Cecilia on the show. Welcome.
Good to be here.
So first, what I'd like to do is just let my audience get to know you just a little bit. Take us back as far as you're comfortable going. One of my favorite things to start with is obviously you've built your life around music now, but what was it in your childhood, in your early life that really solidified music as kind of the center of your professional world?
Oh, well, gosh, that's going back a very long way. I I was brought up in a musical family. My father was a professional flautist. He was principal flute at the Royal Opera House, and he was a flute soloist with many of the main orchestras. And so that was one aspect. Also, he devised a way. Nothing like this, I think, had happened before. In 1946, 1947, he started chamber music groups that were flexible. I don't think there'd been anything quite like this before. So it could be flute, oboe, and piano. It could be viola, cello, and harpsichord. And what this meant, in a very practical way, was that because our house was very large, we had a room in which these musicians would gather. There was always music, and was surrounded by music, from Baroque music to very contemporary music, because some musicians wrote music especially for my father. So there was always something going on in the background. So um, I've always been interested in improvising and writing, but the trajectory is a very strange one in that I came to actually being a composer much later in my life. So many years of teaching, teaching at conservatoires and schools, bringing up a family, trying not to murder them in the process. And the trajectory is a bit of an unusual one in that I came to it much later than most people do. I think I was about 49 after I'd done a master's degree. I have to say that it was perhaps not the best way to do things because, of course, if you leave university or conservatoire, college with your peers, they can take your music with you. But in a way, I'd lost all those contacts. So I was really starting anew. And I was very lucky to find musicians who were willing to give me work and let me experiment with their ensembles. So most of the music I was writing was instrumental right at the beginning.
Interesting. Okay, so before we move along with that line of your life, I want to go back to the childhood experience with your father once, and because I was curious, um, do you feel like your love of music now, your use of music in your career now, came simply from being exposed to your father's music, or did he actively push music on you in a sense?
No. He said on many occasions, whatever you do, don't follow in my footsteps. Don't become a musician. It's not a viable profession. But you see, that's always the best thing, isn't it? When you're told not to do something, it's the way to do it.
Right?
I think there are many composers, aren't there, who have set off on becoming a lawyer or doctor or something, and then decided that it was really music that they wanted to do. I suppose what always interested me was my father did play a lot of contemporary music. And in fact, he gave many he was often on the radio. So he gave many broadcasts of things like the Poulenc flute sonata. I think his was the first broadcast in the UK, Prokofiev sonata as well. I mean, so that there were many things. I also met some of the composers as well. So that was always interesting.
Hmm. Yeah, I was curious about that because, of course, I'm a father myself, and I'm a musician, and I have kids that I've never tried to push music on them, and they have some level of interest in music. But I think that's I was curious about that because I had a mentor at one point in my life that used to say that if you have to convince someone to be a musician, they shouldn't be a musician. Just pretty simple. And so that's an interesting thing. So then, as we kind of go back into your story, then you mentioned you started composing later in life than is typical, and mentioned the challenges, of course, of that in the sense that you'd lost some of the momentum, I guess you could say, in a career of that you would have built had you done it the whole time. Now, in that interim, from your collegiate days and your conservatory days to your late 40s when you really started diving into composition, were you mentioned motherhood and the role that you played during that time of your life. Was music still part of your life, just not professionally at that time?
No, it was professionally in the sense that I was teaching. I was
Oh, I
teaching
see.
music. So I was teaching at a music conservatoire. I was teaching at a specialist school, Yehudi Menuhin School, for highly talented children. Um, and a lot of what I was teaching was to do with musicianship, a particular kind of musicianship. So it was creative. And what I was doing was creating bits of music that I would then give to students and say, go and work on this, see what you can get from it. And interestingly, a lot of the children I worked with then have actually gone on to become young composers. So or really doing very well.
Mhm.
That's nothing to do with me. It just happens that way. But it was so there was always music, and I somehow managed to do this in parallel with bringing up children as well. My
That,
husband helped as well. So I don't want people to think I was a single mother and just managing on my own. I
right.
did have,
Right.
yeah.
No, yeah, that I understand. I'm curious too, just if you've had a chance to, I'm sure you have, but I'm interested in your reflections on what it's like to try to be a musician and a mother and operating in the professional sphere that you now operate in. The role of being a mother is
Mhm.
going is going to create challenges for you as a composer, not only being a woman, but also having that role of being home with children. Has that ever been something that you've thought of as a barrier in your career, or has it always just been part of the rich experience of being human?
I'm afraid I've never really thought my life out in a planned, methodical way. I think one thing has flowed on from another. But interesting what you said about composition and what your mentor has said. I suppose if you really, really want to compose, you'll do it somehow at some point, whatever the situation. So
Yeah.
it's always been something in my mind that I wanted to do. The opportunity wasn't always there at the beginning because, let's face it, when you have a family, it's exhausting. So a lot of the time I was tired, and sometimes just writing in the middle of the night, which isn't the best time or the best way to do it. So in some ways, I suppose having a family just means working around it and trying to do it in a most practical way. So not always easy, but then nothing ever is it, if you really want to do it?
Right. I mean, it sounds to me like you're kind of going with my second option of an answer, which is just part of the rich tapestry of life. We fit things in that we love to do. I know that as a father, I feel a lot of those same pressures, which is that, on one hand, I could say, look what my career could have been if I didn't have kids. But then what, what would that have meant? It would have meant very little, because it's something that it's part of who I am and it's part of, part of what I do. So no, I think that's an important thing to reflect on, at least in my perspective, just because we all think about, um, the different barriers that we might have in our careers. I know that one of the barriers in the US that we think about a lot is that we're kind of obsessed with what degree a choral musician holds over here. So in other words, there's a very strong hierarchy around, um, if you have a doctorate versus if you don't have a doctorate, or that kind of thing. And so we all think about these barriers, and I'm just interested in your experience making music in the UK and around the world, in the different places that you've experienced music making. Have you ever come across those types of barriers, just related to your life experience being different, the starting the career as a composer later? How has that impacted you?
Well, I think one of the interesting things has been when I've mentioned that I've come to it all much later, it has actually engendered some kind of conversation with uh, composers who wish to be composers, and I feel everyone must be encouraged to do what they want to do at any point in life. So regardless of whatever the problems are going to be, there's always a way, I think, of overcoming it. And what I'm extremely grateful for are to those who had faith in me and gave me the opportunities. And I think that's the thing that every composer is hopeful for, to have the opportunity to write what you wish to write. And then the most desirable thing is when you're commissioned to write what you really want to write. And that is exciting. And also having relationships with choirs, with instrumentalists in a way that keeps that continuum going. So all of this, I think, is really really helpful. It's really rich, a really rich experience.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I asked the question mostly because I have encountered some people in my professional life that, probably unintentionally, but nonetheless, I've seen it happen where there's a certain condescension that happens sometimes when they encounter someone who doesn't take the traditional path through the profession, whether it be, like I mentioned, getting the right degree, the right, in air quotes, degree, and then having some type of success. There sometimes can be either condescension or resentment. Well, you didn't follow the path that I followed, therefore. I just wondered if you've ever come across any of that particularly. Does anyone ever look down their nose at you because you are newer to it?
Well, the odd thing is, I haven't been aware of it.
Okay.
But I'm afraid I've just been so determined that I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm doing it regardless. That to a certain degree, although this sounds a little bit arrogant, it didn't seem worth even thinking about anybody was being condescending towards me in any way, either that I'm a woman or that I'm coming into it late. So I just felt that, I mean, the overriding thing that I always feel about everything that I write, as long as I'm writing to the best of my ability and to write what I'm really hoping the commissioner will want, then I feel happy that I'm doing what I can. I don't feel, I mean, how to express it? I mean, I just think that it's important just to do things in the way you feel are the best and the right way, and not entertain any idea that what one is doing is any less good than anybody else.
Right.
So,
I think that's the right answer. I will arrogantly say that is the right answer.
oh,
I have no qualms, but no, I agree, and I agree with that philosophy because it's if one is so focused and intent on what their artistic calling is, and watching that artistic calling come to fruition, then one is less likely to care if other people are feeling that way, feeling resentment or feeling condescending. So that's great. I love that answer. So
well,
yeah, go ahead.
and there is another aspect of that, which is I think that uh, you have to whatever one is writing really has to be from the heart, from really wanting to communicate something. So really, it should go direct to the listener. So and here's the other thing I think about composition. I think maybe singing comes into a similar category in that singing and composition are perhaps the most personal of all musical outpourings. Somehow, I may be completely wrong about this. I'm sure there'll be many people who say, no, that's not true. But I feel if you're a pianist, if you're a cellist, maybe the instrument could be the problem. But
Mhm.
if you're a composer and if you're a singer, it's very personal. And it may be that many people just simply don't like one's voice, don't like one's literal composition voice, in which case, there's nothing I can do about it except say I'm doing what I feel I can do as my best. So
Right.
yeah,
No,
it's another
I
aspect.
agree with you about that. I've made that observation actually on this show several times in various conversations over the last couple of years, where as someone who teaches kids to sing, this is something I experience very viscerally with kids. When you tell a 15-year-old that they're out of tune as a singer, for example, it's really hard to do that without taking it personally,
Yeah,
because it's me. I am the instrument. I am out of tune. Whereas if you tell a clarinetist that they're out of tune, they might just tweak their embouchure and wet their reed just a little bit more, and it's just over their head. It doesn't seem to phase them in the same way.
right.
And so I think there is something to that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
which is actually a perfect segue. You started mentioning a little bit about your philosophy. I was going to ask you next about some of your compositional philosophy. In other words, your process that you go through and why you choose that process, or is it something that has just evolved for you over time? How do you write a piece? What is step one? Did you know that the Choralosophy podcast is entirely listener supported? So the way you support as a listener the show is by a win-win scenario, which is just the ideal situation. It's win-win, which means that if you get a discount, I get kickback. That's how it all works, right? So that's listener supported, meaning you choose to purchase those things, like a Sight Reading Factory membership, like some choir folders next year for your choir at mymusicfolders.com. You choose to buy some sheet music at ryanmain.com or graphitepublishing.com. Every time you enter the promo code Choralosophy at checkout at any of those vendors, you get 10% off. There's also Voce Vista Video, which is that overtone analyzing software that I geek out about so much. It is a must. Get it in time for school year next year to start. It is fantastic. You go to vocevistavideo.com/Choralosophy, and there you can download the software for free and play with it for 30 days. Once you decide you want to buy it, then you can enter in that Choralosophy promo code. So that's just a little behind the scenes on how it all works. I appreciate everyone's help, and without you listeners doing your part to make this show happen, it just wouldn't happen. So thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoy the show.
Oh, step one. Right. Well, step one will be the commission. So the commission and the commissioner, and the interconnection between commissioner and the composer. And I feel at this point it is really important to be as receptive as possible and to try and understand exactly what it is the commissioner would like, whether it is for a particular occasion, whatever that entails, to understand the sound quality of who I'm writing for, instrumentalist or orchestrally, chorally, whatever that may be. So I feel that's the very first part of it. If it involves choral music, then this is a part I actually find really exciting because one has to find the words, and very often the words can be words that exist already. I feel very strongly that whatever words one choose, they have to be the very best one can find. That may sound a little bit, strange to say that, but I do feel I am most comfortable when I find words that I have absolute confidence in and feel that I can do what I can. But the other aspect of finding words is working with poets. And I really enjoy that because somehow it's so alive, it's interactive, one can interact with that. I've worked with a number of poets, and just thinking about you in Kansas City, something I'm really excited about, and it hasn't happened yet, and it's partly my own personal circumstances and the pandemic, but I am collaborating with Tony Silvestri for a commission for Charles Bruffy and the Kansas City Chorale.
Oh, very nice.
I am really looking forward to working on this. And this, I mean, if I could use this as an example, this is the exciting part because Charles Bruffy and I discussed the ideas behind it, what might work best for his chorale. And then Tony Silvestri and I discussed how best to shape and structure this. And what he has come up with as a libretto is fantastic and really interesting. And I suppose what this particular work does embodies a similar approach that I have to writing other music. This it's basically a 3-movement or 3-part piece that focuses on different aspects. The title will be Pioneers of Sound, and it focuses on Thomas Edison and recording, and on Marconi and the radio, and Hedy Lamarr and her channel hopping device, which of course is responsible for Bluetooth, GPS, and all these other things.
Very
so cool. Each of them are really interesting, and he's fashioned something just beautiful. So that's something I'm looking forward to doing. But very often because three pieces that I've been working on recently. I've been working with an English poet, Sean Street, and I have given him or asked him to look for words that could be put into a context that actually come from something historical, from a diary or a logbook. And one particular one, which I think is very relevant to America, is, and this was something that was going to be performed last month. Obviously, hasn't happened.
Right.
This is a work called Angel of the Battlefield. And you may already know when I say that who I'm referring to. And it is a work about Clara Barton. And Clara Barton founded the American Red Cross. And I can't remember exactly. I think this is a significant year for her. Maybe it's I need to look that
Some
up.
type of anniversary. Yeah.
It's an anniversary, exactly. And what Sean Street has done is to take some of her poetry and some of her entries into logbooks and to fashion them into something more complex and richer that really gives an idea about her time and what she was doing. And of course, what many will know is that she worked as a nurse, not as a trained nurse, but as a nurse in the American Civil War. And then after that, founded the American Red Cross. But what was really quite sort of coincidental and extraordinary is I was writing this in the time of pandemic, and it's all about healing. And the other extraordinary thing was I was writing it at the time of the death of George Floyd, and I had decided that I wanted to use a spiritual within this work. And of course, we get into areas of cultural appropriation.
Mm-hmm.
White woman writing, making an arrangement of a spiritual, is that okay? And I have to say, I think it is absolutely okay, because I feel it's really important to talk about these issues. And also, the one that I chose has its roots in England. It has its roots in Methodism with Charles Wesley. And it was in the middle of the 19th century, just before the time of the Civil War, that it was shared with the Afro-American community. So I feel it's a very important one. It is, there is a balm in Gilead.
Uh-huh.
So that is also in this piece, Angel of the Battlefield. But you asked me about the process. So there's an awful lot of process beforehand,
Right.
deciding on the idea, deciding if it's a historical idea, where the text is going to come from. The hard bit is putting the notes on the page and then working around that. And I mean, that I think is when you go into the abyss.
Well, so okay, so I have a question there about when you mentioned like if it's a historical project in some way, if you are involved in a historical project, does that impact the notes that you put on the page? In other words, do you try to visualize the music from in that time at all, or do you just write with your voice regardless of does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, it does make sense, and it's a really good question. And I think it rather depends, because if it's choral, I think it's all my voice in the sense that I will be giving it my thumbprint or however it is. Another thing that isn't quite the same, and I've just finished writing a piece which has a different process. And this is a piece that is, again, it's to do with the pandemic. It's a piano solo. And what I've done with this piano solo, again, it's in three parts, is to take notes that already exist and to incorporate them into the piece itself. So the first movement is a reference to the 14th century, cheery stuff this, the Black Death in Europe. And Guillaume de Machereau, the French composer, was one of those people who actually managed to escape the Black Death. And he was a great advocate of social distancing, so clearly works. And he has written a lot of lovely songs, and I took one of those songs and I've changed it. I've woven it into the piece itself. And then another part of it is Bartok. Bartok was deeply affected, badly affected by the Spanish flu in 1918. And so I've taken one of the folk songs that he made an arrangement of, and I've submerged that into the texture. And the very last part of it, again, it's American, is, you probably know this, in 1918, 1920, there was a very popular skipping rhyme, which is, I had a little bird, its name was Enza. I opened the window in influenza. So that was the skipping rhyme of the time. And I've also used a folk song, an American folk song, Little Bird, Little Bird. So the imagery there is that birds give us hope, that and it's to do with children as well. And children are our future. So that's a very long, roundabout answer to what you're saying about how I'm influenced by historical things. If it's instrumental, probably more so. If it's choral, probably more. It's much more to do with me.
Right. Okay. That's really fascinating. I as someone who is not a composer, I can definitely look at it from the other perspective of putting music in front of choral groups, and I think one of the things that, well, let's imagine that most choral directors stand in front of lay person singers. In other words, they're people that come to choral music as a as a way to experience something outside of their professions, outside of their day-to-day lives, whether they be students or adults who, you know, sing because they enjoy it. That to me, that approach that you just described is, I would call, one of the more popular approaches with singers, where they want to sing something that transports them to a time and place. I think that's one of the reasons that singers enjoy singing in a choir. So the idea that you would be able to, and basically what I'm saying is, I appreciate as a conductor when composers do stuff like that, because it gives me ways in rehearsal to connect the singers both emotionally and historically to the work. You, by simply pointing out that this would be a melody, or this would have been a hymn tune that would have been relevant in this time and place, their eyes kind of start to like they go wide, and they start to visualize themselves being transported. And I think ultimately that's why we all are musicians in some capacity. We want to be transported in some area.
That's right. And one of the things I always feel and hope, and I don't know whether it works or not, but if I've come across something that I don't know anything about, but of course I'm always looking, I'm always searching, and I'm always interested in new ideas. And if I find it a really fascinating idea, I like to feel that it might possibly spark an interest in the listener. And that there is something that I have mentioned it a number of times before. I was commissioned to write a piece for a French festival, and I was looking to find ways to join up the French with the English, some kind of communication, entente cordiale, that kind of thing. And I found that the American aviatrix, Harriet Quimby, had flown across the channel, the English Channel, in 1912, and she succeeded, and she did it in 50 minutes in the fog. She didn't mess up her plane when she landed near Calais, and I find that it really quite sad that very few people have heard about her, and the reason is obvious, of course, because the Titanic happened to sink on the same night. So it was all about the Titanic, which was utterly appalling. But here is this extraordinary woman who actually, I think about 3 months later, died in a plane crash when she was doing a demonstration over Boston Harbor. So it's things like that. I mean, I was slightly disappointed when I found I could only find a stamp that represented Harriet Quimby in America. And I thought, she's a remarkable woman. She deserves more exposure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds like a really fascinating story, and it sounds just the way your eyes and your voice light up when you tell these historical stories indicates to me a lot about the way your music is. And I've done quite a bit of your music, and so I can definitely vouch for that transportative, not even sure if that's a word, nature of the nature of your music. And because if you are fascinated by these stories, if you are fascinated by the context and the time periods and the what's going on, then that's more likely to translate into beautiful, interesting, fascinating music. And that's something you do very well.
Well, one always hopes. Yeah.
Now, I do have one kind of slightly tangential line of question for you, before we move on. But so you mentioned, this is kind of going back to your life history a little bit, when you were a teacher in your younger years. Do you now that you are focused on composition, do you ever get to spend any significant time, now, of course, ignoring the pandemic year, but do you go out and interact with the musicians that are performing your music much? As a teacher, I imagine you're always interacting with young musicians, but does that get to be part of your existence? And how do you feel about doing that when you do get a chance?
If I get a chance, I love it,
Hmm.
because, of course, being a composer is such a solitary business. And going back to poets, this is why it's lovely to work with poets. You have that interchange. But if a choir is working on something of mine, if it's the first time, I absolutely love going to a rehearsal and talking with them, being with them. They can ask me questions. And that's a real delight. It's also really interesting to get feedback as well. Occasionally, people would say, "Look, why did you do that?"
Hmm.
Sometimes, I did it because I wanted to. I thought it would work in this context. But I really enjoy it. So yes, I enjoy the opportunity.
Now, are you the type of composer who also likes to give feedback to the choirs about how and the directors, of how they're interpreting your music? If you don't hear, if they're not hearing it the same way you hear it, how do you handle that situation?
Well, I think that's much more driven by the conductor, because I think almost every conductor I've worked with has always given me that opportunity to say, do I have any comments? And sometimes they're very little things, like, it could be a little faster or a little slower or something, or um, perhaps even moving from one section to another, not such a long pause. Um, and I think, I mean, I personally feel I never want to barge in and say, uh, do something different or anything, because I feel once the music is handed over, and particularly if it's the commissioner, then it is their desire, their
Mm,
responsibility to do things how they feel it. And it may be that what they find in the music is not actually something that I saw there, but that I also find is really worthwhile and works really well.
hmm.
So I feel it's delicate. It does remind me, there is a nice story, I think, of Bartok and Kusevitsky and Concerto for Orchestra. I think Kusevitsky had said to Bartok, "Now listen, if there's anything that's not going quite right, just let me know." And apparently in the first bit, he was giving all sorts of notes, this, that, the other. And Kusevitsky took him off and then came back and said to the orchestra, "I think we now understand each other." So I think there are elements, aren't there? But I feel that I trust the composer. Sorry, not the composer, the
Mm.
conductor. So I think if the conductor has a real sense of how it should be, and most of the time I'm in agreement, and sometimes there are other suggestions that happen, which is always interesting.
Right. That's wonderful. Um, I, I've had many opportunities as a conductor, to work with the composer in the room, and there are definitely the reason I asked the question is there are definitely different types of composers in that way, and some being more controlling than others.
Mm.
And the way I think of that philosophically from the conductor side of the equation is that I think of my job as an interpreter, and as opposed to I don't like to think of myself as a computer that is recreating the MIDI file that that the conductor or the composer put in. And some composers are a little bit more controlling in that way. Like they want it, every single little aspect to be shaped the way it happens in their mind. And I think we lose um, a lot of the beauty of the spontaneity of the music making. I think of the whole equation as, I need you as a composer. I need you to create a vision. And then with my work in rehearsal with the singers, we take that vision and make it a reality. And it's the collaboration between all those brains that it taking what you've written and then making it happen in a room. That to me, it's that interaction of all those people involved that really make our art form so special.
Oh, yes, I do agree. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's also a matter of trust as well.
Yes.
You have a relationship with the conductor and the choir or your instrumentalists, and you hand the work over, and I think it's lovely to be a part of it. I mean, the other aspect is that not all composers can actually be there at the first rehearsal, or not
Right.
the first rehearsal, but at some point during the rehearsal. So you have to leave it to the conductor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting too, because I also, so obviously the sweet spot seems to be what you described, and I would love to someday collaborate with you. That would be wonderful. But I also wouldn't want a composer in the room who doesn't push back against me at all, because I like I like the idea that there would be a collaboration. In other words, that I don't think the composer should just necessarily smile and nod no matter what I'm doing. There should be a little bit of a happy medium, maybe. I don't know.
I can't imagine there are any composers who are not happy to push back where they feel it needs it. And I think that is a thing, isn't it?
Hmm.
I think one doesn't overdo it. You just see the crucial points that need tightening or need some kind of expression, and then leave it. But I think too much interference, then, as you say, sort of messes around with your own interpretation. So there's a happy balance
Right.
and connection between
No,
conductor
absolutely.
and
Yeah,
composer.
absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. So as we kind of wrap this up, I've been really enjoyed chatting with you. It's always nice to talk to you. Thinking about how your world is opening up there a little bit in the UK now, and we're starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel, and getting arts organizations back together, and music starting to happen around the world again. Do you have any exciting plans for the next year that you want to tell us about? Any exciting projects? You've told us about some of the things you're working on now, but do you get to go do anything fun anytime soon?
Uh, yes, I mean there are lots of fun things. I mean, what's really quite interesting is, of course, because of this last year, so much has been put on hold.
Hmm.
But at the moment, I've got interesting commissions for the next couple of years. So they are sort of unfolding one after another. Yes, and some will become apparent when the time is right. So yeah.
Do you have any Oxford projects coming up that they would love it if you told people about?
I'm just trying to think. I mean, most of nearly everything that I'm writing for Oxford is friends. I'm just trying to get my brain into some kind of order. You'll need to cut this bit because
Oh,
I'm thinking.
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm just trying to think. Um, um, um. The problem is there are so many um, different ones that it's
Mhm.
probably not easy to separate out. After after the piano solo that I've just written, I'm now writing an organ work for the highly talented Anna Lapwood, who is director of music at a very young age of Pembroke College, Cambridge. And after that, I'm writing a string piece for the London Mozart Players, which is going to tour. Um, And then after that, I've got a number of other things that really all lined up in the future. One of the things that I'm really looking forward to writing, which will be soon, is a work to do with the Mayflower.
Oh, cool.
It's called Good News from, oh, wait a minute, let me get this straight. Yes, so this is a work to do with the Mayflower. It's called Good News from New England. And it's based on, again, diaries and logbooks of William Bradford, who led the Mayflower Pilgrims over to America. And it's a piece probably around about 10 to 12 minutes. But it is all around the coming to America, what happened there. William Bradford's wife died. Well, many of them died, so many. But it was really rather awful. I think she probably threw herself over the ship and committed suicide. Cheery. And then it's also about Thanksgiving. So Good News from New England.
That's really interesting. And I'm assuming, is that SATB choral? How is that set up?
It is, yes, it'll be SSATB.
Okay.
And it is a cappella. And it involves one of the original hymns, the Old Hundredth, in it as well.
Well, and there is a shortage of music, of choral music, centered around the American Thanksgiving holiday. That's something we actually talk about over here a lot. So you might have found a place in a market there.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
It is actually called Thanksgiving.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah. There, we joke kind of about how we have tons of Christmas music, and there's tons of Easter music, but we celebrate a lot of American churches do Thanksgiving themed Sundays, but there's not a liturgical music because it's not a liturgical holiday. And so I've been in interesting conversations about that. So we'll definitely get the word out about that. And of course I'll include links to your website in the show notes so that people can find those things. Which reminds me, is your website probably the best place to send a person who is interested in finding more of your music?
Yes, it is. There is a contact page as well. So please do send anybody that way, or to OUP. Maggie Tate and my agent Val Wittens. She's Choral Connections. There's there's all that information on my contact page, and also anything. I've got quite a large choral page there. Yeah, so yeah, at the moment because of last year, of course, it's not very updated. I need to sort that out. But
I can identify.
Another thing to do.
Yeah, I can identify. Just now feeling like I'm getting my ducks in a row to return to regular performance life and teaching life and all of that kind of stuff. It feels kind of good, actually. It's a lot of things have been reprioritized, but it's good to get back to music. So I'm really excited about that.
Is it actually really starting to happen in America?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. We've already had my pro group has already had a concert. So we just had 3 weeks ago. We gave our first concert that in well over a year.
You can sing.
Oh yeah.
Because we do have it's an interim, I hope, situation over here. Absolutely maddening. Professional singers can sing, amateur singers cannot, and that involves probably about 2 million people and 40,000 choirs. And this was sprung upon us by our government the day after they promised everything would be fine. And of course, it's caused such despondency and real chaos because, of course, possibly what the government doesn't seem to realize is that behind singers, there are other people, there are venues, there's money involved. There's so many other things just collapse when there's a last minute decision made like that.
Yeah, that is very unfortunate.
Mm.
We've been definitely hit less hard by some of those regulations than you guys have, for sure.
Oh.
My students were allowed to sing under some pretty strict protocols, but we were allowed to sing for most of the year. There was a time period where, of course, we were in school virtually. But once we came back to school, we were allowed to sing. We just had a pretty strict regimen of HEPA filtration, air systems put in place, distancing, singers' masks. It was like singing in an obstacle course, but we still were able to sing. And for a lot of kids, that was a saving grace for them during a really hard year. I heard from a lot of young people about, hey, this is like the only normal thing I get to do in my life. And so it's huge for mental health.
Well, yes, I was just about to say that for mental health, it is crucial. Social, I mean, I feel it's so vastly underestimated what singing brings to people's lives.
Hmm.
I know some people don't enjoy singing, but they might enjoy listening to singing as well.
Hmm.
So, it's got every benefit you can imagine. I just feel our government has not really understood that in any shape or form.
No, and that's unfortunate, especially with how fantastic your government's vaccine response has been. In other words, you guys are kind of leading the world in some ways and getting everyone vaccinated, which means that you should be letting people sing again. Like, that's kind of the point.
That point has been made over and over, and particularly even one interesting thing, which of course many amateur choirs demographic is probably going to cover those who've already had 2 vaccinations.
Hmm.
So it doesn't really make an awful lot of sense.
Yep. Or the young kids in the cathedral choirs who are at very low risk. They're there's no good scientific reason for that policy. I can say that without being afraid to to make that claim. Yeah. Well, that is, I wish you guys the best, and I hope that they come to their senses very soon.
Thank you very much.
Well, Cecilia, thank you so much for this conversation. I think people are going to find it engaging and interesting. And of course, like I said, I will point as many people your way and as possible, because your music is worthy, and people that don't know it really need to dig into your catalog, because there's gems everywhere. And I really mean that. So thank you so much for talking with me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Okay. We did it.
Well done. How many have you done now?
Now, on the Oxford series or just in general?
Oxford.
I think you are my 5th. Let me pull that up just to make sure. Let's see. So far on the Oxford series, I've had Sarah Quartel, Bob Chilcott, Will Todd,
Yeah.
and Rena Esmail. So and then you. So it's going really well. I think the idea is to kind of space them out every 6 weeks to 2 months, and that way I can get to the other topics that I like to talk about on my show. But I'm about 2 years into doing the show, and it's going really well. So I'm really enjoying it as a nice part-time job.
Excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I'll be in touch with you and Val as we get closer to publishing the episode, and that way we can coordinate sharing and creating media and stuff like that, and try to drum up some performers for you.
Excellent.
Okay. All right.
Thank you very much, Chris. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of the episode. I hope you got something out of that and enjoyed that conversation. I find Cecilia to be a fascinating human being, and I plan to continue to program her works long into the future. I think she's going to have some real staying power in the world of choral music. And so I hope you will go out and check out some of her music if you have not already. And of course, as always, on the way out, do me a favor if you can and support the show in some way. I've listed several different ways throughout the episode. So just to recap, liking, sharing, commenting, engaging in the content is very helpful. Leaving ratings in podcast apps That's the Apple Podcast app right now. It's got a lot of ratings in there, but I would love to get to 100. That's just a nice round number. So if you head over to the Apple Podcast app and leave a rating, that's awesome. And then, of course, the financial modes of supporting the show, heading over to patreon.com/Choralosophy, as well as using the Choralosophy checkout code at any of the sponsors that you heard about in today's episode. Thanks a lot, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.